Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our. 1 second, I'm making sure my camera's working here. Yeah, it is. Hello, everyone, welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mir Hashem, today we will be learning Daf Kuf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the very bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Chaf Beis Amud Beis Siman Shin Tes Vav Sif Gimel. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and the Sunnah Batzaru Bashivya Ha'im Debein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha Hamakam Yerachem Alehem V'Yitziam Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afela La'ira B'Shibud L'Geula Hashtab Agala Uzman Kariv Nemar Amen. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema for by Shemer Ben Esther Fradel Yitzchak Ben Tzion Medusha Rivka Bas Shira Leah Chavadas Bas Sarah Lavram Ben Tzion Ben Sarah Liba. They should have a Refuah Shalema B'Sai Shar Chayla Yisrael. Our learning should be a schus for Yonis Ben Michal and Yoel Ben Michal. The Rabbeinu Shalom should watch over them and protect all of our other brothers and sisters who find themselves in harm's way. B'chol makom shehem. Okay, so we're continuing to learn the halachas that are negeya to creating an oihel arai, to creating some kind of a tent. The word oihel literally means a tent. We're talking about making a horizontal roof, albeit a roof that's an arai roof, temporary, flimsy roof, not a real binyan. When is it aser? When is it mutter? Today's page looks like it's very long. Really, it's not, I would say so complex, but we're going to see right away a lot of the rules that we need so that we can follow the math on particular cases and understand if they should be mutter or they should be aser. So we're actually going to begin today not with the Mechaber, but with Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Zayin. Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Zayin serves as a beautiful hakdama that kind of lays the groundwork, gives us the information that we need to work with. Says the Chavetz Chaim in Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Zayin Mita. Hine Kedei shenovin heitev es divrei hasif, so that we should be able to properly understand and well understand the coming sif. Akdem hakdama kitzara. I'm going to give you a brief introduction. V'hu. The introduction is as follows. Da'afdel inyan binyan kva. When it comes to a real bona fide binyan, building a real bona fide, solid, permanent structure, af im asa ezer dava mashahu. Even if you do something tiny, lahoisef al habinyan, to add something to a binyan kavua, bein b'mechitzais, whether you're making an addition to the house on one of its walls, or bein bagag, or whether you're making some kind of addition or extension to the roof of a binyan kva, chayiv, that would be an issa daraisa. V'choshken im oisa es kol hagag, certainly to go build a roof. If you want to build a roof that's a gag kavua, not a gag arai. So you don't want to go out to the backyard and you want to build a bona fide pergola. So you're going to build a pergola. You're going to use 4x4 or 6x6 posts at the corners, and then you're going to use pressure-treated lumber and plywood and shingles, and you're going to construct a roof. Obviously, that's binyan kva. Binyan kva is an issa daraisa. That would be the issa daraisa of boina. Mikam makayim, nevertheless, le'inyan oihel arai, when it comes to the question of constructing an oihel arai, a roof that's only arai, only temporary in nature, lo asru ba'oisa es hagag lechud, we don't aser midrabanan, making only a horizontal roof. In other words, to make only an oihel arai without mechitzos underneath, the words of the Mishnah Berurah are, that's not aser, but we have to continue. Remember, we already learned previously that to make an oihel arai is aser midrabanan, but it depends very much on the circumstances. So here we have to read very carefully the rules that the Mishnah Berurah gives here. Mikam okay. Linyan oil arai, when it comes to making an oil arai, lo asru ba'isas agag l'chud, they did not aser midrabanan, making only the roof, Im loy she'oise sagag, unless you make that oyel arai, the roof, kidei lahagein ne'achama, to protect from the sun, v'ageshamim, or from the rain, v'kayoytza bazeh, or to provide shelter in any other way, the ozhu ktsas bebechinas oil, because then it's very similar to actually building an oil kva, and therefore it's also midrabanan. Now let's read a little bit further, and then I'll explain this. Avol belav hachi, but if it's not being put up for shelter purposes, then loy osru, then we do not aser putting up an oil arai, ki im ba'oisa gam hamechitzois arai shetachtav b'Shabbos. Then you would need walls underneath as well. Okay, what did the Mishnah Berurah just say? So again, to build an oihel kva is an issa daraisa. That's the issa daraisa of Baina. To build an oihel arai is an issa darabanan. Now the Mishnah Berurah goes into the question, how about making an oihel arai, but only making the roof and having that the area beneath the roof is not enclosed by mechitzos. So you're going to put up 4 poles, and you're going to spread a sheet over the top of the 4 poles. So you have an oihel arai, you've constructed an oihel arai, but the underneath area, the area beneath the oihel arai, is not enclosed by mechitzos. There's only 4 poles at the 4 corners. Is that usher or is that mutter? Here the Mishnah Berurah is giving us the rule. The answer is it depends. It depends on the purpose of the oil arai. If that oil arai is being put up for shelter, so if you're putting up that oil arai to provide shade from the sun, or if you're putting up that oil arai to provide protection from the rain, or for any reason, but if the oil arai is being put up to provide shelter to the area underneath it, then it's also midrabanan to make that oil arai, even if the area underneath the oil is not surrounded by mechitzos. Okay? But if avo belav hachi lo yasru, but if that oil is not put up for shelter, then it's not aser ki im ba'isa gama mechitzos arei shetachnu b'Shabbos. If you're putting up that oil, and that oil is not being put up for shelter purposes at all, in that case, it's only aser if the area underneath is going to be surrounded by mechitzos. And there's another requirement too. Gam also says the Mishnah Berurah, lo asru kiyim b'sha'asa keseder. If the oil is not being put up for shelter, then the first requirement for this to be aser is that the area underneath must be surrounded by mechitzos. But not only that, you also have to build it in the typical order of building a binyan. It has to be done keseder. What does that mean, says the Mishnah Berurah? Mitchila hamechitzos. First you have to erect the walls. Va'achakach hakisui. And then you have to put on the roof, because that's the way you build a house. First you build the walls, then you build the roof. Da'oz daimek tzas la'oil kva, because then it becomes similar to an oil kva. Aval im also lehepich. But if you don't do it in this order, if you do it the other way, if you put up first the roof and then the walls, lo yasru, then it is not aser. The yesh paiskim, and there are also paiskim shesarvin who hold to be inon, that in a case where the roof is not being put up for shelter, there's a third requirement. To be inon chi yatzarch gamkein la'avish atachtov, the area underneath has to be providing some purpose. It has to be filling some need. And we find that Mechaber actually paskins that way later on in Siv Zayin. So a little bit complicated, but it's very important that we get these rules down pat so that we can understand the rest of today's shir. So again, Oyhel Arai. Everything that we're talking about over here is when you're putting up an Oyhel Arai, a temporary roof. That's only an Issa D'Rabbanan. When does the Issa D'Rabbanan apply? So it depends. If you're putting up the Oyhel Arai so it should shelter the area underneath it, then we don't need mechitzos underneath it at all. Just putting up the oyel arai, just putting up the horizontal roof, even if there are no mechitzos beneath it, right away that's usher, because you're putting it up for shelter. Once you're putting it up for shelter, it's similar to an oyel kva, and it's also midrabanan. But what if you're not putting up that roof for shelter at all? So, for example, we're going to discuss very shortly somebody who's putting up a bed. Now, a bed, let's say the bed consists of a solid headboard. So you've got a nice big, let's say it's a twin bed. So you've got a 39-inch wide headboard. It protrudes over the bed and it goes down to the floor, and it's a solid piece. It's not legs, it's a solid board. So you've got a board by the head of the bed, you've got a board by the foot of the bed, and then you've got a bed platform that goes from the headboard to the footboard. Well, guess what? If you erect this on Shabbos, if you put up the headboard and then you put up the footboard, you just created two mechitzos. Those are two walls. Now you're going to take the bed platform and you're going to put it from the headboard to the footboard. What did you just do? You just essentially created an oyel arai, right? Because that bed platform is covering up, it's serving as a roof over the area beneath it. But was that constructed to be an oyel? Did you do that to create a shelter for the area underneath the bed? Is it also lahagein? No, you didn't make this for a shelter. You did it to make a bed. Oh, so says the Mishnah Berurah like this. In such a case, in order for it to be usher, you are constructing an oyel arai, right? But in order for the Issur D'Rabbanan of an oyel arai to kick in, there are some requirements. First of all, you need mechitzos. Well, let's follow the math. In this case, you do have mechitzos. You have two mechitzos, which later on the Mishnah Berurah is going to say that's enough. You have two mechitzos, the headboard and the footboard. Those are two walls. And you put it up kiseder. You put up the headboard, one wall. You put up the footboard, second wall. Then you put on the roof. Oh, you did a kiseder. So that, we're going to see, would be usher. So again, why is it usher? Because it is an oyel arai, and even though it's not made lahagein, even though you didn't put it up for shelter, but you met the other requirements. What are the other requirements? There are mechitzos. There are at least two mechitzos over here. And you built it kiseder. You put up the two walls, and then you put up the roof. But what if you don't have both requirements? Let's say you don't have a bed with a solid headboard and a solid footboard. You have a bed that has four legs. Or you have a table, your dining room table. Let's say your table has four legs. And you want to stand up a table, or you want to stand up a bed. Well, in that case, the surface of the bed is an oyel arai, covering, roofing over the area underneath it. But is it made lahagein? No, it's not made for a shelter. Well, there are no mechitzos. There are no mechitzos at all. There are only four legs. So you have no mechitzos. So even though you put up an oyel arai, but it's not made lahagein, and there are no mechitzos. So that would be mutter. Or let's go back to our case of the bed with the headboard and the footboard. Let's say what you do is you get somebody to help you. And you tell him, listen, you two guys hold the bed platform. So now the roof is already there. They're holding up the bed platform. Now you go and you stand up the headboard, and then you go and you stand up the footboard. And now the construct is finished. That's also going to be mutter. Why? Because again, it's not also lahagein. This bed is not serving as a roof to shelter the area underneath it. And even though there are mechitzos, you didn't build it kiseder. You didn't do it in order. You didn't make the walls and then the roof. You put up the roof and then the walls. And that would be mutter. Really, we've covered most of today's shir right now. So now, let's see inside. Let's go into the Mechaber. It says the Mechaber Sif Gimel, bottom line, Kuf Kaf Beis Amud Beis. Mita, a bed. Kishema Amida Maisa, when you stand up the bed. Now, we're going to talk here about the bed with the solid headboard and the solid footboard, which would be mechitzos, enclosing and surrounding the area underneath the bed. And like I said earlier, it's only two mechitzos, but Mishnah Berurah is going to say that's enough. That's all you need to create the Isser. Says the Mechaber, Mita, this bed, Kishema Amida Maisa, when you stand it up, Asr lahaniach haraglayim tchila, it would be asr to first put up the headboard and the footboard, ulahaniach alehem hakroshim, and then to lay on the planks that make the bed platform. Ella rather, what would you have to do? Yasim akroshim tchila ba'avir. First, you would have to have somebody hold up the planks that make the bed platform. You would have to have two people, let's say, holding it up in midair. Va'achakach haraglayim tachtehem. And then you could stand up the headboard and the footboard. So again, why is this? Because if you do it by putting up the headboard, the footboard, and then the platform, so you've created an oil arai with mechitzas surrounding the underneath area, and even though it's not asil lahagain, but there are mechitzas, and you built it kiseder, so that would be the Yisud Rabbanan. But if you do it the other way, if you hold up the platform, then put up the mechitzas, so yeah, you have an oil arai, you have mechitzas, but it wasn't constructed kiseder, and since it wasn't constructed kiseder, the Yisud Rabbanan does not kick in, and that would not be aser. Now, continues the Mechaber. V'hani mili. When would this be aser? When is it aser if you do the mechitzas first and then the bed platform? V'hani mili kishaharaglayim mehim dapim mechubarim. This is only a problem if the headboard and the footboard are solid pieces. Dapim mechubarim, he means that they are the headboard and the footboard are constructed out of planks that are affixed to each other. So you might have a headboard that's made out of 6 planks, but the planks are all connected to each other, so it forms one wall. So you've got a solid headboard and a solid footboard. Kimoi dafnei hateva, so that the headboard and the footboard are like the walls of a box. They're solid. Aval raglayim shel mitoy shalanu, but the legs of our beds, so that you don't have mechitzas, you only have legs. You have 4 legs at the corners. V'chein raglei hashulchan, or the 4 legs of a table, mutar b'chol gavna. Then you could build it however you want. You want to put up the legs and then put up the tabletop or the bed platform? No problem. Why? Because very pashut. The tabletop or the bed platform is not a gag that's being made lahagain. It's not being put up to shelter the area underneath it, and there are no mechitzas. So since there are no mechitzas, it is mutter. Now let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Yud Ches, the very end of the bottom line of Kuf Chaf Beis Amud Beis. So the Mechaber said over here, let's take a look at the words of the Mechaber. Aser lahaniach haraglayim tchila, you're not allowed to first put in place the headboard and the footboard. Ulahaniach aleim akroshim, and then put on the bed platform. Now, notice what the Mechaber said. This is only aser if you first put in place the mechitzas. So the clear implication of the Mechaber is that you're building these mechitzas on Shabbos. In other words, the Mechaber does not say that the Isser kicks in so long as the roof goes on second and the walls went up first. If the Mechaber would have said that, then that would mean, let's say the headboard or the footboard were already put in place on Thursday. And now on Shabbos you want to come and you want to put on the bed platform. Well, that is kiseder. The mechitzas went up first. The headboard and the footboard went up on Thursday. You're putting the platform up on Shabbos. So it is kiseder. But did you put up the headboard and the footboard on Shabbos? No. You put up the headboard and the footboard that make the mechitzas on Thursday or on Friday morning. You didn't put them up on Shabbos. The Mechaber is being very clear. The only time this is going to be aser is if you constructed the mechitzas on Shabbos and then you put on the platform on Shabbos. Otherwise, it's not going to be aser. Why? Very simple. Because if you do both on Shabbos, it's mechzi kabaina. Now it looks like you're building. You put up walls and then you put up a roof. But if all you do on Shabbos is put up a roof, then it's not mechzi kabaina. Then there's no similarity over here to binyan. And since the roof is not being put up lahagain, then the Yisud Rabbanan won't kick in. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Also laniach bediktuk kasav lashon zeh. The Mechaber was being very precise when he put in aser lahaniach, that you're not allowed to put in place haraglayim tchila, the feet, the walls first. The dafka lahaniach aser, because this is only aser if you put up the walls on Shabbos. The heavy bazek kemasche lases bechitzis la'oil. So now it looks like you're building something. You put up walls, and now you're putting up an oil. The aser kishemaniach achakach kroshim lamaila, and therefore it's aser if you put up the bed platform on top. Aval im hayu munachim mikvar, but if the bechitzis were already there from before Shabbos, bezeh hamokim, in this place, meaning the headboard and the footboard were already erected before Shabbos, and now you're leaving them in the same place where they were put up before Shabbos, and now you're putting the bed platform on top. Then it's mutter, like we saw in the Hakdama. Why? Because it's not a roof that's asi lahagen, it's not there for shelter, and you didn't do it kiseder on Shabbos. You put up the walls before Shabbos, and now on Shabbos, all you're doing is putting up a roof. And the only time the Yisud Rabbanan kicks in when the roof is not lahagen is if you first put up walls on Shabbos and then the roof on Shabbos. That's not the case here. The walls were already there. Now be very careful what the Mishnah Berurah said. The Mishnah Berurah included the words bezeh hamokai. If the headboard and the footboard were standing before Shabbos, but now you moved them and you put them in, you moved them to a new place, and now you put up the roof, that would be aser. Because now you erected the headboard and the footboard on Shabbos in a new place. So even though they were standing on Thursday, they were standing over there on Thursday. You just erected them over here on Shabbos. So then you put up walls and then a roof, that would be aser. Now, the Mishnah Berurah throws in a caveat that we're going to discuss later on. However, you should know, im hamita rechava b'yoser, if you're talking about a very wide bed, we'll see how wide later on. Also, lodas ha'magen Avram b'sif katan chaf aleph afilu ba'ofen zeh. The Magen Avram will say that if it's a very, very large bed, then this would be aser, even in this situation. We're not building it kiseder. V'ayin shabbos if you'd gimel ma'ashadichta b'zeh. We'll discuss it later on. Always cutting your test. The Mechaber said you have to put up if you put up haraglayim tchila, if you put up the headboard and the footboard first, then the Yisud Rabbanan is going to kick in. Explains to Mishnah Berurah Duhu Kederach Binyan, because then you're doing it kiseder. You're doing it in the way that you build a structure. The haraglayim he mechitza, the legs, the headboard and the footboard are the mechitzas. Va'akroshim shalakisui, and the planks that make up the bed platform, hu k'maygag, that's the roof. V'nimtze ka'isa oil b'Shabbos. And now, effectively, it looks like you have built an oihel on Shabbos. That would be the Yisud Rabbanan. V'alkein, therefore, tzarech l'shanois, therefore you have to change the way you do this. Lechais hakroshim shalakisoi ba'avir, you have to hold up the bed platform in the air. V'achakach loses bitachtov haraglayim, and only then can you put the legs underneath it, Tehu shaloi kederach binyan, so that you do it shaloi kederach binyan. Incidentally, I just can't resist pointing it out. You should know that the Mishkan was built this way. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he put up the Mishkan for the very first time, he held up the urios, the tapestries that formed the roof of the Mishkan. He held them up in midair and stood up the krushim, the walls, underneath. Very interesting. It was done al pines. The Rabban Shalom, it's a machlokes in the Gemara. If he was so physically large and so physically strong that he was able to do this without an ace, or it was done b'nace. Miraculously, the Rabban Shalom helped him out with an ace. Now, if it included an ace, then really we have to understand why the Rabban Shalom wanted it this way. The Rabban Shalom doesn't make nisim for no reason. So that's for another time. Okay, moving on to Sif Chaf. So the Mechaber said, "V'hani mili." When does the Yisud Rabbanan kick in? The Yisud Rabbanan only kicks in if you actually have a solid headboard and a solid footboard. But if all you have is four legs at the corners, so you have no mechitzos, then there's no iser here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the reason why it's mutter, if all you have is simple legs, is the ba'oil arai kazeh, because over here where we're dealing with an oil arai. And what kind of oil arai are we dealing with here? This bed platform is not being put up as a roof to shelter the area underneath it. This roof, this bed platform, is being put up for a different reason. It's being put up al gabov to use the top of it milamala. You're putting it up to create a bed. The tashmish of this bed platform is not the area underneath it. The tashmish of this bed platform is to have a surface to lay on top of. So this is not put up lahagain. This is not put up for a shelter. Because we need a bed to lay down on top of, it happens to be that we are factually roofing over the area underneath the bed. And now your kid could go run and hide under the bed. But you didn't put up the bed to shelter the area underneath it. So it's an oil arai, and it's an oil arai that's not osui lahagain. It's not made for shelter, and therefore loy osru, and therefore the Chazal didn't aser it. They didn't put in their issa derabanan elikisha oisa gamachitzos tachtav, unless the area underneath the bed is going to be surrounded by mechitzas. And if you have a bed that doesn't have a solid headboard and a solid footboard, it just has four legs at the corners, so then the area underneath is not enclosed by mechitzas. And therefore, this is not osir even midrabana. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. When you spread out a sheet or a mat in order to be a roof, but if you put up an oil, if you put up a sheet, you put up a mat, and you do it in order to shelter the area underneath it, or even if you're not putting it up to protect from the sun or to protect from the elements, you're putting it up for a different reason that makes you want to roof over a certain area so that you could be underneath it. I'm trying to think. I'm not good on this is something I always struggle with. I'm not great on the fly with coming up with those examples, right? So the easy case where the oil arai is putting up lahagain is to protect from the sun, to protect from the rain. But there might be other reasons why you put it up. Maybe for privacy. Maybe there's a very tall house next door, and you don't want people from the second floor of the house next door looking down to see what you're doing. So you're putting up a roof. That's also for shelter. It's for shelter because you don't want people to see what you're doing, but that's also, you're putting it up for shelter purposes. Aser af b'loy mechitzos. That's aser, even if the area underneath is not surrounded by walls. Ukahi de sif beis b'soifai. Like the Mechaber gave us a case on Kuf Chaf Beis Amid Beis in Sif Beis. What case is he referring to? The case where you have, let's say, a patio with 4 poles and a frame of some kind on top, and you want to unroll a tarp to create a roof. Now, over there, that's usher, even though the patio is not surrounded by mechitzas. Why? Because that awning is being put up lahagain. So again, we have to hammer this home. If the oil arai, if the awning or the roof or whatever it is being put up lahagain, then it's an issa d'Rabbanan, even though the area underneath is not surrounded by mechitzas. But if it's not put up lahagain, if it's like the bed platform, which is not being put up to shelter the area underneath the bed, then it's only an issa d'Rabbanan if there are going to be at least 2 mechitzos that are surrounding the area underneath the bed, and only if it's being put up kiseder, the walls first and then the platform. Now we have a very interesting Magen Avram. Let me give you just a little background into the Magen Avram so that we can quickly understand it. We learned a halacha in Siman Shin Yud Gimel. Okay, you have a house, and the house has a skylight. Now the skylight is in the middle of the roof, and you have an open skylight, and sometimes you want to cover it. Maybe when it's time to go to sleep, take a nap. You don't want the light coming in from the skylight. You want to cover the skylight. So we learned in Siman Yud Gimel that you're allowed to go ahead and cover up that skylight on Shabbos. Why is this mutter? Well, like I always say, let's do the math. So let's plug in the halacha that we learned over here in Shin Tes Vav. Is there a problem of making an oihel? When you go ahead and you cover up that open skylight, is there a problem that you're making an oil arai, which should be an issa d'Rabbanan? Well, based on what we learned today, you might want to tell me, well, the mechitzas of the house are already there, so the mechitzas would have put up first, but they weren't put up on Shabbos. There are mechitzas underneath, you're putting up a cover on top. Is that a problem of oil arai? No, it's not a problem of oil arai. We said in Shin Yud Gimel, it's not a problem of oil arai for a very basic reason. Forget the question of the mechitzas of the house. It's not an oil arai because of what we learned in the previous year. There already is a roof. What you're doing is you're being moisef, you're extending, you're adding onto a pre-existing oil. To add on an oil arai onto a pre-existing oil is mutter. That's like the awning that was unrolled already at Tefach before Shabbos. If the oil is unrolled at Tefach before Shabbos, you're allowed to unroll the rest of it on Shabbos because you're not making an oil arai mitchila. You're not initially making an oil arai. You're extending a pre-existing oil arai. So too the skylight and the roof. The roof is already there. Now you're putting an oil arai and you're closing up another part of the roof. So you're just being moisef. No problem. That's what we learned in Shin Yud Gimel. Now comes along the Magen Avram, and the Magen Avram clears a shaila on a very interesting case. You have a house, and the house has a roof. And in the house, you have a fireplace. The fireplace has a chimney. What's a chimney? A chimney is 4 walls that surround a chute, right? And the chimney goes up and penetrates the roof. So the chimney is its own independent area that's enclosed by 4 walls. Now what you want to do is you want to go ahead and you want to close up the chimney on Shabbos. So you have some insulating material and you want to push some insulating material into the chimney on Shabbos. Claire's the Magen Avram, is this a problem of oihel arai on Shabbos that should be also b'd'Rabbanan? Let's see it inside. Now, there are going to be some questions that are going to come up in your mind right away. The first question that's going to come up is, wait a second. The walls of the chimney are pre-existing from before Shabbos. What did we just say in today's shir? We said in order to have the problem of the oil arai, we don't really look at this, that what you're putting in to close up the chimney is lahagein. You're not putting it up lahagein. The reason you're putting up, the reason they did this, it would seem, is because you had a fire in the fireplace, and you needed the smoke to go out of the chimney. But now the fire went out, maybe you have some smoldering embers, you don't have so much smoke that needs to go out. So now you want to put in some insulating material into the chimney. Why? Because you want to keep the heat inside the house. So you're not putting this up lahagein. So this is really not something that's done lahagein. And if it's not done lahagein, it's only aser if the area beneath it is surrounded by mechitzas, which it is, the chimney is there, but it has to be that you put up the mechitzas first on Shabbos. Now, the mechitzas in the chimney were there from before Shabbos. So why should this be aser? That we're gonna cross that bridge, but I wanted to be ma'ur the shaila right away because many of you are gonna listen to what we're gonna read here in the Mishnah Berurah. You're gonna say, how does the Magen Avram even have a question? So I just wanted to head that off. Let's read it inside. Kasav Magen Avram. We're here in the middle, a few lines into Mishnah Berurah's Kat and Chaf, about 8 lines, 9 lines into the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kasav Magen Avram. The Magen Avram writes. The list time nekev shaha'ashan yotzei shakarin kumin, to go ahead and close up the chimney. Bekar shel teven, with a cushion that's filled with straw, v'kiyotzabay, or some other type of insulating material. So you've got the chimney, you want to push a cushion up inside the chimney. Says the Magen Avram, efshir da aser. It's possible that it's aser. Why? The keven sheyesh la'osei hamakom mechitzais b'fnei atzmai. The chimney has its own 4 walls. So now, this is not Shin Yud Gimel. This is not you have an existing roof and you're being moisif an oil arai onto an existing roof. By the skylight, you've got a closed roof. You've got an opening in the middle of it. When you close it, you're being moisif on a pre-existing oil. Not so by the chimney, because the chimney is a chute that has its own independent four walls. So when you cover the chimney area, you're not being moisif on the gag of the house. That the roof of the house is covering the house. You're now covering the chimney chute that has its own independent four walls. And none of it is covered yet. So you're not being moisif on an oil. L'chayra, you're making a new oil. Efshar d'aser, the kemchi yesh loisa amakom b'chitz b'nei asma have a oil b'tchila. Ve'in a doimel amashi yitarnu b'simin shin yud gimel listoim ha'aruba shamagag. This is not similar to the heter shin yud gimel, where we said you could close the skylight mitam du rako yisefes oil arai. Because when you close the skylight, you're just being moisif, a temporary cover on a pre-existing oil. Hasam ha'aruba eina machzik ela mixus agag. Over there, the hole of the skylight is a hole in a small section of a pre-existing roof. Aval but over here by the chimney, hanekev sha'ashan yoitze, the opening of the chimney, maxik kol roichav amachitze shesavivla. The chimney is a box, and the opening of the chimney is the full size of the box. None of it is roofed over. If a tefach of the opening of the chimney was closed, so then to put in a cushion would be no problem. You're being moisif on a pre-existing oil. But that's not the case of the chimney. The chimney is completely open. When you put in a cushion, you're not being moisif on oil. You're making a brand new oil. So the Magen Avram declares that maybe this is usher. Now again, the bomb kasha on this right away is, hold it, you're not putting this up lahagain. This is not a gag that's usher lahagain to shelter on what's underneath it. And if it's not usher lahagain, then this is only usher if you first erect mechitzos on Shabbos and then put up the roof. That's not what's happening here. The chimney was already there. Hold that question. Now, first says the Mishnah Berurah Lefizeh. According to this tzad of the Magen Avram that this should be usher, pashut, it still is pashut. Let's say you have a flue that goes out the side wall of the house, and you want to close that up. Mutter listoi bekar, you would be allowed to put in insulating material to close up the flue that penetrates the side of the house. Durak tesefes bechitza ba'alma. Then there's no shail of oil. Oil is only a roof. Over here you're closing up a mechitza. Well, it's arai, so there should be no shail. Oid kasaf, the Magen Avram also writes, the blech sha'asoi bekumin, a metal damper. So this is a door that's actually affixed to the chimney on a hinge, and it can open and close. It's made out of metal. Oid kasaf, the blech sha'asoi bekumin v'kavu hasham mutter listoi by b'Shabbos v'yamtiv. That the Magen Avram says there's no shail on. You can definitely close it on Shabbos. The hoil the kavu hasham heavy kedelis, because that's a door that's affixed to the thing, which is clearly meant to be open and closed. Over there, there's no shail of boine, right? It's like opening and closing a door on Shabbos. We said previously, there's no shail of boine, because it's affixed to the structure and it's clearly meant to be open and closed. Take a look at the Tesefes Shabbos, he writes, the Madam is topic of Magen Avram, this suffix of the Magen Avram, who davka kishachur sha'asha yoytze, who machzik shloisha tvachim. First of all, says the Tesefes Shabbos, this shaila of the Magen Avram's, the whole shaila only exists if the opening of the chimney is more than 3 tvachim wide. Why? The lavachi, because if the opening of the chimney is less than 3 tvachim wide, armin and lavud. So then lavud kicks in. And then we don't look at the chimney opening as being opened at all. We look at it as being closed in halacha. You put an insulating material, you're not closing anything. You're not closing an opening. Halachically, it's not an opening because Lavid says it's closed. Like we said in the previous share, that if you have the hoops, remember the hoops of the boat? We said if the gap between the hoops is less than 3 tvachim, Lavud kicks in, it's already closed, and putting a sheet on top of the hoops wouldn't be usher because you're closing up an already closed opening. Oh, and now comes back to the question that we asked. Says the Prima Godim, says the Mishnah Berurah, you could definitely be Saimach on this Tosefes Shabbos, and you could close the chimney if it's less than 3 tefachim wide, and you could rely on limud. You know why, says the Mishnah Berurah? The Balavachi Davazer Rafui who eats on the Magen Avram Gufa. The Magen Avram himself, even though the Magen Avram writes that he had a suffix over here, that maybe closing up this chimney should be usher because you're making an oil arai and it has mechitzas under it. The Magen Avram himself held that it was very shvach, really, to answer this. Why? The efshir da mechitzas shetachtav loy chashiv mechitzas le'inyan zeh ha'il shasuyes mikvar. Because of the question that we asked, how could you say that this is usher mishum oil arai? The insulating material that you're putting in is not osi lahagain. You're not putting it there for shelter purposes. And so right away it needs mechitzas under it. And the mechitzas that are under it, you have to put them up on Shabbos, and you have to put up the mechitzas first and then the roof. But the mechitzas of the chimney were pre-existing. They were there before Shabbos. So the Magen Avram himself is like, how could we answer this? Now, what the Mishnah Berurah doesn't explain over here, but he does address it in the Sharet Zion, Eskalach Zion, is, okay, so what was the Magen Avram's tzad to answer it? What the Chavetz Chaim explains is that the Magen Avram had a new suffix. The Magen Avram said like this, you're right. An oil arai that's not being put up for shelter, the area underneath needs to be surrounded by mechitzos, and the mechitzos need to be put up first and then the gag, and the mechitzos need to be put up on Shabbos. You're right. And the chimney does not seem to fit that bill. The chimney doesn't seem to make the bar. But wonders the Magen Avram, says according to the Chavetz Chaim, wonders the Magen Avram, it could be that this case is as bad, it's as chamor as an oil arai that's made for shelter. Right? Like this, an oil arai that's made for shelter is more chamor. You don't even need mechitzas in closing the area underneath. An oil arai that's not made for shelter, you get now the requirement, you need mechitzas underneath, and it has to be put up keseder. Wonders the Magen Avram, what's the purpose of this insulating material that you're stuffing into the chimney? You're right, it's not there lahagen. You're not putting it up so that rain shouldn't come down the chimney. That's not why they did it. They did it to keep the heat inside the house. But you are doing it to seal up the opening. When you stand up a bed, are you standing up a bed to seal up an opening? When you stand up a bed, you're doing it to create a platform to sleep on. So you're not doing it lahagen, you're not doing it to shelter the area underneath it, and you're not doing it to close anything off. But when you stuff a cushion into the chimney, it's true that it's not lahagen, but you are doing it to close an opening. And the Magen Avram says, maybe that's just as chamor as doing it for shelter purposes, and therefore you don't even need the mechitzas. Forget that the mechitzas were already pre-existing before Shabbos. Technically, you don't even need the mechitzas. And maybe therefore, it should be aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah weiter. Venera, says the Mishnah Berurah, this whole shaila of closing up the chimney, Venera de kol zeke she'ein munach az gacholim loicha shois pa'atanor. See, I misspoke a little bit earlier. I forgot this Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah says, this whole shaila is only negeya if the fire in the fireplace is completely out. There can't even be glowing coals left in the fireplace. The Ilavachi, because if there are glowing coals in the fireplace, b'chol gavni aser liyisrael listam esachar lamayla, then it would be aser for a yid to close up the chimney anyway. Da'yidei stimasai, because by closing the damper or by putting insulating material into the chimney, goyrim kiboy la'agacholim. You're going to make the glowing coals dim because you're cutting off the air supply. Even though that's the davar she'ein miskaven, psik reishu. Okay, Mashakasa b'simin reish to test b'sayfa b'simin reish ayin zayin sif aleph. Ois kat l'chav aleph. The Mechaber told us that this whole shaila of standing up the bed is only negeya if the headboard and the footboard are solid, so that they act as mechitzos. Tapin mechubarin b'simin tov kaf beis kasav b'beis Yosef to be inan shiyu mechitzos megian ad la'aretz. The Beis Yosef and Tov Kuf Beis says that not only do the headboards have to be solid, the headboards have to extend all the way down to the floor in order for there to be a shaila. Says the Mishnah Berurah in the brackets, however, im samach la'aretz pachas b'shloisha sham, im samach la'aretz pachas b'shloisha sham, ein adoifen magia, armina bazel lavud. The Beis Yosef says that the walls have to go all the way down to the floor. Points out the Mishnah Berurah, not really. As long as they go within 3 tfachim of the floor, lavud will kick in and will look at the gap as being closed. So while the Beis Yosef says they have to go all the way down to the floor, not really. They just have to go within 3 tfachim of the floor. Little bracket over here, ayin sham. Major discussion over there. You see, over here, we're saying lavud l'chumra. Right? Over here, in order for the Issa D'Rabbanan to kick in of making the oil arai using the platform of the bed, it has to be that underneath is surrounded by mechitzas. Says the Beis Yosef, the mechitzas have to go down to the floor. Says the Mishnah Berurah, not really. They only have to go within 3 tfachim of the floor. Because once they go within 3 tfachim on the floor, we say it's closed. And now it's already considered mechitzas. Well, that generates a chumrah. The shaila is, do we say lavud l'chumrah? Whole major raid, do we say lavud l'chumra? Olinian teva sheyesh shulayim gam lamata. Another question puts forth the Mishnah Berurah. We're talking over here about standing up a bed that's going to roof over what? It's going to roof over the area between the underside of the bed platform and the floor. And you have a headboard and a footboard that serve like mechitzas. How about if it's a little bit different? How about if the underside of the bed is actually a box? So the bed itself has its own floor. Headboard, footboard, floor connecting the headboard and the footboard. And now you want to put on the bed platform. So now you're not creating an oihel over the floor of the house or over the ground. You're creating an oihel over the floor of this bed. Is that a problem? That we're going to discuss later. He says here in the brackets, Schlafbank, a sleeping bench. We'll discuss it later. Okay, let's start at least Ois Kat and Chaf Beis. The Mechaber said that in order for there to be a shiloh over here, the headboard and the footboard have to be solid, like the walls of a box. Ois Kat and Chaf Beis, because of a Taz, the Taz writes, Daf de Betor Isa Arba Daf in Mechubarin. Oh, I mentioned this earlier. If you're talking about a headboard and a footboard, then the area underneath the bed is only surrounded by 2 mechitzas. Now, the Torah writes that you need 4 mechitzas. You need a headboard, a footboard, and 2 sideboards. So the Torah seems to want that in order for the Issa D'Rabbanan of oil arai to kick in, since this is not osli lahagein, the area underneath has to be surrounded by 4 walls. Says the Mishnah Berurah lav dafkahu. That Torah is imprecise. He doesn't really mean that you need 4 walls. Because the underneath area of the bed, while it's true that you don't put up the bed surface to shelter underneath it, but you do make use of the area under the bed. People put their shoes at night under the bed. They put their slippers during the day under the bed. So the under the bed area is an area that is used. You certainly don't put up the bed, lahagain, but the area underneath the bed is used. And in that case, says the Mishnah Berurah, Asar afilu kisheyesh larak shnei dapin mishnei tzadin hamagin laaretz. Then it's enough to have 2 walls that go down to the ground. The b'shtayim levad chashav oyel lemechitzas u'chamei b'sevav l'inichavius. V'chei kasu sharei achronim. Aval b'shulchan aruch demat aval b'shulchan. But by a table, we're going to make a distinction now between a bed and a table. Aval b'shulchan demat or shulchan aruch. By a table where we said it's mutter, if you only have 4 legs. Hu afilu kisheyesh lo ma'at mechitzos. A table, we're going to say, is mutter, even if it has a couple of walls. So the bed is usher, even if there's only walls formed by the headboard or the footboard. A table would need more walls. So there's a difference, even though the Mechaber seems to equate a bed and a table, they're only the same when it comes to being mutter. The bed is mutter if it only has 4 legs and no mechitzas. The table is mutter if it only has 4 legs and no mechitzas. But on the chumrah side, they're different. A bed is more chumrah than a table. A bed, where you use the area underneath the bed, if it has 2 mechitzas, it's already usher if you do it keseder. You put up the headboard of the footboard and then the platform, that's usher, even though it's only 2 walls. By the table, in order for it to be usher, you would need 4 walls, because you don't really use the area under the table. Putting your legs under the table is not called using the area under the table. That's just the way you sit. You're not using the area under the table. And your little kids hiding under the table is also not called using the area under the table. If there are mamish 4 walls, then putting on the tabletop would be considered making an oil. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with the words V'yesh B'achreinim. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. This was for Limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Shem should send Yeshua's Refuah's Parnaset Shadukim to those in need. We should be zeichet to see the Bias Gal Tzedek. B'meherav Yameinu Amen. Be well.